Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm Jon Favreau.
I'm Jon Lovett.
I'm Tommy Vietor.
On today's pod, we'll talk about how Republicans have made Joe Biden an offer he can refuse, the race to vaccinate America, and the new face of the Republican Party, Marjorie Taylor Greene. All right, let's get to the news. On Sunday, 10 Senate Republicans wrote a letter to President Biden that basically said, "We see your $1.9 trillion COVID relief plan, and we would like to offer people a lot less relief. The $618 billion counterproposal includes $160 billion for fighting the virus and distributing the vaccines. That's like Biden's plan. Everything else is different. They do $1,000 checks for individuals making $50,000 a year or less, a smaller expansion of unemployment insurance that also cuts out 3 months, no funding for state and local governments, no increase in the minimum wage, no subsidy for childcare." The Republicans also asked for a meeting with Biden. He said sure, so they're gathering at the White House today for a, quote, full exchange of ideas. What fun. So, Joe Biden campaigned on a promise of unity. He said he wanted to work with Republicans. Now 10 of them have brought him a counteroffer, which would give Democrats the 60 votes they need to pass a regular piece of legislation. Lovett, why not sit down and hammer out a deal? Make Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill proud.
I don't think there's anything wrong with sitting down. I think there's nothing wrong with having the conversation and then saying, well, this isn't enough because of the crisis, the big economic crisis that the economists all tell us we need to put a huge amount of money in to fill the whole state and local, help people with unemployment, help people with these checks. And, what you're proposing is not nearly enough. Halfway between what you're proposing and I'm proposing is not nearly enough. You're not addressing the crisis. And so in the spirit of unity, I will respect you in good faith, bid you adieu, pass a bill through reconciliation, and then trust you not to burn the Capitol down. Again, the 3-step process for unity.
Tell me, how do you think the Biden folks should handle this? Because now that the Republicans have reached out, we got here's the headline in Politico today. How serious is Biden about bipartisanship? We're about to find out. Some Biden advisors are starting to argue that Biden can pass the bipartisan test without Republican votes. You read that right. So there's a lot of skepticism in the media. That's right.
You read that right.
You read that right. A lot of skepticism
At
in
a
the media.
record scratch.
Yeah, he's going to be forced into this corner now where everyone expects him to be bipartisan, and they're going to call him a failure if it's not bipartisan. How should the White House handle this?
Let's go back to the beat him like a drum Joe Biden, because he also said that a lot. I mean, right, like to Lovett's point, no one, I've not heard a single economist, not a Republican, no expert say that $600 billion meets the moment and does enough. Like you said, it's about the same amount for vaccinations and PPE and that kind of stuff. But the unemployment insurance example, I think, is very important because Biden wants to take the amount of unemployment insurance per week and go from $300 to $400. And he wants to extend that program through September. The new proposal keeps the unemployment, the rate at $300 and extends it through June. No one thinks we're going to have the pandemic under control by June. We certainly won't have it under control if we force people to go to work at jobs that put them at risk and continues the spread of the virus. And I think that's why the coverage in Washington of this has been so frustrating. I think the press, a lot of folks, a lot of pundits spend a lot of time worrying about bipartisanship as if that is an end in and of itself. It is not. Joe Biden was elected to handle the coronavirus. If what's required, according to experts, is closer to $1.9 trillion, then they should go for that. I think the real risk is that you construct some small bipartisan bill that includes the popular stuff, and then when you try to do a second bill through reconciliation, you might even lose some of the more moderate Democrats and can't get that done. So I don't think he has a choice but to take this meeting. It's good to have conversations. I just think the risk is getting bogged down in a negotiation with these guys, losing time. States are starved of money. We don't have vaccination set up. That's the disaster.
Yeah, and I will say it doesn't seem like, at least from everything we're hearing from the White House and also from Democrats in Congress, that they're gonna waste much time on this. They're all talking about how they need to move fast. So clearly, a lot of lessons have been learned from 2009. I am grateful to the Republicans for this offer because I think it does a great job of spelling out the differences between the two parties. Like in 2017, they were all willing to spend a lot of money on a pretty unpopular, partisan, Republican-only bill that gave a huge tax cut to the rich. Now they're unwilling to spend a lot of money on a very popular bill that gives economic relief to the whole country. And so that's, and I also think, by the way, So there was 8 Republican senators that had been talking to the White House. They tacked on 2 more so they could make it 10 to show, okay, if all these 10 were on board, we could pass through a regular bill. But like these 10 Republicans, like you got fucking Shelley Moore Capito, Jerry Moran, Todd Young in Indiana. Like, Mitch McConnell's not letting these people vote for a bill. It almost would have been funny for Joe Biden to be like, yeah, accepted. Now let's vote on it. Because probably you wouldn't get those 10.
John, I just want to say you could have thrown in a fake name there, and it would have just blown right by me.
Yep, I was vulnerable to that.
I honestly,
could have been.
If you had quizzed me on the 2 senators from Indiana, I would not know. Or Mike Rounds. Who's Mike Rounds? Senator from South Dakota. Fun fact. Okay, so I also think that when Biden ultimately decides to go the reconciliation route, he needs to just continue talking about how this piece of legislation has both bipartisan support in the country among voters, which we've seen in our poll, shows about 70% of people supporting it, including 4 in 10 Trump voters. It also has bipartisan support among governors and politicians outside D.C. You had the Republican governor of West Virginia today saying, we need a lot of money spent. Even if we spend too much money, that's not the danger. The danger is spending too little. There's bipartisan support for you. Like, he should talk about how the bill has bipartisan support everywhere except among Republican politicians in Washington. Those are the people on their own.
And, I have to say, there was, Chuck Schumer put out a statement over the weekend that, said it so plainly. He's like, we're not going to not do enough because that dragged out the recession in 2009. And we're not going to get dragged along for a long process with Republicans because that's what we did on Obamacare. And they abandoned us right at the end. So it's like, yeah, we're not going to do a long, dumb process to try and get your votes for half a loaf.
Fool me once. Or twice, or 3 times, or 4 times, or 5 times.
Yeah, but that's it. That's it. And then after the sequester, no more fooling.
Now we figured it out. 10 years later, we are onto your game a decade later.
Yeah.
Hey, better late than never. So Biden doesn't need a bipartisan bill. He does need all 50 Senate Democrats on board, including more moderate senators like Arizona's Kyrsten Sinema and West Virginia's Joe Manchin. Last week, Vice President Kamala Harris did interviews with local news stations in both those states as a way to sell Biden's American Rescue Plan. This did not sit well with Joe Manchin, who told a reporter, quote, "I saw the interview. I couldn't believe it. No one called me. We're going to try to find a bipartisan pathway forward. I think we need to, but we need to work together. That's not a way of working together." Tommy, what was the White House's strategy in sending Kamala out to do those interviews, and what did you think of Manchin's reaction? Poor Joe Manchin, huh?
Yeah, I didn't know they were manufacturing fainting couches in West Virginia now. Look, this is politics 101. Like, the White House, you do local TV interviews to build support for a legislative priority. I saw some of the reporting on this yesterday, like specifically Politico referred to it as an effort to troll Joe Manchin. I was like, oh my God, what happened in this interview? Like, did she read an opposition research file on him? And then I watched it, and admittedly, it wasn't the cleanest interview Kamala Harris has ever done. She was asked about Biden's climate change plan and what it would mean for coal jobs, and misspoke and said something about clearing abandoned landmines instead of coal mines, I think. So it was a little clunky. But mostly she focused on job creation, how the COVID relief bill would work, how the White House wants to prioritize vaccine distribution, how they want to open up schools. It was substantive. And she talked a little bit about West Virginia specific stats on poverty or small business closures, but it was not about Joe Manchin at all. I don't think his name was even mentioned. And so it seems like a wild overreaction by Manchin in the media.
He's a senator from West Virginia. He's not the viceroy sent by the Queen's regent.
What's his position? Blow off my local press? That doesn't make any sense.
You can't do local news in West Virginia without first getting the say-so from the boss.
Yeah, so the fair question, right, is this a smart way to build support in West Virginia for the policy and make it easier to get Joe Manchin's vote? Judging by his reaction, clearly it was not. But if you really look at what Joe Manchin is saying about the legislation, he's being pretty positive. He seems focused on targeting the direct checks. He thinks that maybe a married family that makes $300,000 getting a check is too much, and he wants to lower it to $50,000. I would argue that's insufficient, especially if you're in a state with a higher cost of living. But those are very reasonable policy discussions to be had, and not some blow up as you might think if you read Politico.
Joe Manchin's reaction was ridiculous. I will say, I would bet that the White House legislative team was not super psyched about the strategy of sending Kamala out to swing states for that, because like you're right, like building popular pressure in West Virginia is not the way to get Joe Manchin on board. It's probably calling him and making sure that, like, everything is wonderful with fucking Joe Manchin. Look, the fact that Joe Manchin holds all the power here and Kyrsten Sinema holds all the power here is an indictment of the fact that we have like a shitty political system. But it sucks, right? But like that's the reality we're living in. Joe Manchin has an enormous amount of power, and you like have to keep Joe Manchin happy all the time, or else a whole agenda that could help a lot of people, can die, which we don't want. It sort of reminded me, Lovett, were you still in the White House when we wrote the famous budget speech about the Paul Ryan budget? And he
was in the front row.
Yeah, so Barack Obama was going to deliver a speech at American University on Paul Ryan's budget.
I do remember
and
this.
We had a great time in the speech, like just attacking Paul Ryan on everything by name. He's killing grandparents, all the good stuff. And the legislative team did not make us aware until the speech that Paul Ryan was going to be sitting in the front row. And so Barack Obama goes and delivers all these hits about Paul Ryan's budget to Paul Ryan's face at the event, which was not a great way to earn bipartisan support. Just as a lesson that we learned there.
Oh yeah. He would have been all for for the agenda otherwise. One other thing though, Tommy made this point, but it's like the Republicans for years now. It's the Republican tax cut punished blue states that are more expensive to live in. Their proposal to lower the threshold for where the checks would go to are designed to punish states with a higher cost of living. And it is a reminder that, like, even when you see someone like Joe Manchin force some policy like that, like the warping that the Senate does in the way that it's anti-democratic happens all the time. Sometimes it's partisan, sometimes it's not. But it's interesting that, of course, a group of Republican senators want to, don't have a problem lowering the threshold to where it would not help people in a ton of places that desperately need the help.
Yeah. But and Tommy, you were saying this too, for all the concern about Joe Manchin on this bill and Joe Manchin on a whole bunch of things like filibuster, other shit, he does seem like he was in an interview even before this interview with the Kamala Harris interview thing happened, saying a million times, because they were like, would you vote for the bill for reconciliation? Or you support this? And he said 10 different times, I'm going to make sure that Joe Biden is successful. We want to make sure Joe Biden is successful, which tells you what you need to know about where Joe Manchin stands on this.
He's just doing his politics. He's doing the right thing. He's doing his politics.
Is Manchin and Sinema and maybe a few others going to take the price tag down a little bit from 1.9 trillion? I hope not, but they might, because again, they hold all the power. You need their fucking votes. So hopefully, though, he comes through and supports the bill as is. So one of the Biden administration's main arguments for the size and speed of their plan is the urgency and magnitude of the crisis. So yes, cases and hospitalizations are falling, and we now have a bunch of highly effective vaccines, but we are also racing against the spread of a number of COVID mutations that are much more transmissible and, in at least one case, more resistant to the vaccines. So we can still control these new variants if we vaccinate everyone as fast as humanly possible. But we learned in a few stories over the weekend that the Biden administration has inherited a bigger vaccine distribution mess than anyone thought. Under Trump, the federal government failed to coordinate with states on almost every level, from helping them staff vaccination sites to literally tracking vaccines. Politico reported that the Trump administration communicated so poorly with states that the Biden administration is now trying to track down 20 million doses that are unaccounted for. 20 million. They also found out after Inauguration Day that the companies producing the shots were nowhere near capable of churning out as many doses as the Trump folks had projected. So, Tommy, we spent a lot of time in the Obama administration talking about the crisis we inherited. How much and for how long should Biden do the same thing with regard to how badly the Trump administration screwed this up? What can he get away with there?
Should we just blame it all on the Iraq War? Is that what you're suggesting here?
Yes.
I think you can't really talk about where we are and what you're doing to manage the coronavirus without talking about some of how we got here and some of the stuff Trump screwed up. For example, the money for states would be less urgent if the Trump team hadn't actively lobbied against giving states money for vaccine distribution in the last couple of COVID packages. So I think there's relevant context, right? Like our testing regime wouldn't be a disaster if Trump hadn't decided that more testing was bad because bigger numbers made him feel bad. But I think that's more context than it is pointing fingers, if that makes sense. I mean, I think he's gonna eat a lot of political fallout for, you know, the conditions that occurred before he became president, but I think every single president does that. I think his focus has got to be on what we're doing now. They want to hear about incremental progress. We all want to hear about light at the end of the tunnel. I'm speaking for myself now. That would be my advice, not to spend a lot of time about the Trump era. And like, you know, if you look at Jen Psaki's briefing today, she got some question about Trump on social media, and she was just like, you know, we don't spend a lot of time thinking about him, to be totally honest with you. And I think that is exactly the right tone.
Love it. To Tommy's point, Biden administration is trying to fix a supply issue, a demand issue, a distribution issue. At some point, they have to figure out like a way to get people booster shots that can help protect against the new variants. So they got a lot going on. From a communication standpoint, how should Biden balance the need to be honest and realistic about how long and hard this might be with the need to offer some hope and optimism to a country that is tired of this shit? Something we also had to deal with in the Obama White House. Like, remember, like, we had to calibrate every speech in 09 and 010.
Every speech has to be like, we're not out of the woods yet we've made progress. We've seen strides. Trump, of course, threw that out the window. I mean, look, first of all, it's worth pointing out that January was the deadliest month we've ever had. Right? We're at like 100,000 deaths. So the full consequences of the failure of the past year are still kind of coming into relief. Not just in terms of what the Biden administration is learning behind the scenes, but in sort of the ongoing economic devastation, the ongoing sort of spread of the pandemic. I do think in terms of what they've been saying about what they're learning is really just about establishing a baseline, right? They're trying to say, we're going to do our best to get the vaccines out the door and get them to as many people, but we do want to make sure there is an accurate accounting of the baseline when we came in. That all the talk about Operation Warp Speed, here's where we started from. And I imagine that there's some spin in there, right? They're going to go hard to try to make the case that they inherited an incredible mess, which I am sure they did. Now, in terms of, first of all, like on the variant front, I think that like there's a lot of very sensationalistic reporting, and it's hard to parse what's really going on. One thing that does seem clear is even as we learn that some of these vaccines are less effective against some of these variants, they are still above the threshold by which we would have declared them a success had we not heard about the incredible success of Moderna and Pfizer at whatever it is, 94, 95%. I do think it is really hard when an administration spent a year poisoning people's minds about the best way to respond to a pandemic as a society, not from the government. I think that's an incredible challenge that they've inherited. I do wonder if now isn't the time, especially because people are giving up on the ways in which they can help prevent community spread right at the moment at which the vaccine is being rolled out. Like we've just now crossed the threshold where more people have the vaccine than have had the illness. We were at 1 million, then 1.3, now 1.5. Like it's rising. Like things are changing. Things will get better. And I do think that like I see them not wanting to overpromise and underdeliver. Biden goes out there and says we'll get it to people by spring, and the White House is like, well, we don't know about spring, and Johnson & Johnson, oh, well, we don't know how it's going to come out. But I do think kind of a saying like we're almost at the end of this. Just hang in there. Just hang in there.
There's way too much doom and gloom bullshit about these new strains. Like, look, we're talking about
some of these stories are terrifying.
Let me unterrify you. We're talking about reduced efficacy rates on some of the vaccines against the South African strain, but we're still talking about a shot that's 50% effective. That's like a standard flu shot. So the bottom line is all the vaccinations that all that data is reducing hospitalizations and deaths to basically zero and then preventing 50% of the transmission. That's a miracle. Like we should talk about it accordingly. It's going to be a long couple months, but I don't think that has as much to do with the new strains and like variants and booster shots and all this stuff we're hearing about now than just the logistics of manufacturing and disseminating the vaccine. If we get that part right, you reduce deaths, you reduce infections, you stop the virus from mutating, so we won't have any more of these conversations because it's not like running rampant. You get the economy going, right? And then in concert with that, you give people economic relief that they need to hang on through the summer. Like all the pieces are there. It's like, it sucks to read this stuff.
I mean, I think also look, that Johnson & Johnson is 100% effective at preventing hospitalizations and death, which is huge, even against the South African variant, right? Look, I think when you talk to people at the Biden White House, it's not just expectation setting. It's not just spin. Their concern is, the CDC has already said that in March, the UK variant would be the dominant strain in the country here. It's 50% more transmissible. If a critical mass of people were vaccinated at that point, we wouldn't have to worry as much about it, right? Like a critical mass of people are vaccinated in a country like Israel. The UK strain is all over the place there. It's still working. I think what they're concerned about is over the next 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, the UK strain takes over here. It's more transmissible. We still haven't gotten the vaccinations up yet. And so we will see another spike. That's what they're trying to prepare us for, which I think, is a real, genuine concern. Again, though, it all, and Tommy, you mentioned, it all comes back to they just got to get people vaccinated faster, and they got to move heaven and earth to do it. And I think Biden doesn't have to go out there and be a barometer every day about whether things are good or bad or in between, right? Like I think we made this mistake with Obama sometimes. It was, here's exactly the state of the economy every single day. Like the president doesn't need to be talking about that. What Biden needs to be doing is talking every day about what they're doing to fix it. Right. And like he needs to get pissed when things don't go right. And he needs to show us that he's fighting like hell. And he needs to show people that he's running through a brick wall for people and keep announcing progress. Right. Like today they announced $30 rapid at-home COVID tests that are 95% accurate that they're shipping to, incremental progress like that is going to be important to talk about every single day.
Well, so I feel like I think that's right. I guess like I think we're combining two things. Like one is the messaging around what's actually going on that's realistic and honest, that doesn't overpromise, and I think that's really important. We can be look, we're not in control of what strains emerge, right? We don't know what the future holds, right. But here's what we know, what we can do. But the other piece of it to me that I think is important is, everybody's fucking sick of this, and people are giving up. And so what is the best thing to tell a country that has been lied to, that feels like, that the people who have sacrificed feel let down by all the people who haven't. You have healthcare professionals who are at their end. You have like a mental health crisis. You have a financial crisis. All of this happening at once. And I do think that there is some space for just some the end is in sight if we do these things, because the vaccine, we need to roll the vaccine out, of course, but like masks and social distancing still fucking work, and we've abandoned them. Large parts of the country, we've abandoned them. So, I think that's what I'm talking about. It's just like, if there's value to just signaling to people that the time is short, and that if they sacrifice a little while longer, because this 7 or 8 week period, that's the other piece of this, that like each of these, the next few weeks matter even more than the weeks that follow, right? Like if we can do something for the next 4 to 6 to 8 weeks, whatever the numbers are based on these studies, like a huge amount of death and a huge amount of pain is prevented if we do it right now as the vaccine is ramping up.
That's right. All right, let's talk about the future of the Republican Party, and specifically whether it looks more like Liz Cheney or Marjorie Taylor Greene. What a choice.
Speaking of diseased variants, here we go.
This week, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, just a courageous hero in his own right, will help decide the fate of both women. He'll choose whether or not to block a resolution kicking Cheney out of leadership because she voted to impeach the guy who incited a violent insurrection. He'll also meet with Greene, who's facing calls to be expelled from Congress after CNN and Media Matters surfaced some old social media activity where she liked a Facebook post calling for the assassination of Nancy Pelosi and FBI agents, heckled Parkland survivors, and blamed the California wildfires on a space laser controlled by a Jewish family. Greene also believes the QAnon cult is worth listening to, that Muslims don't belong in government, that 9/11 was an inside job, that the Parkland and Sandy Hook shootings were faked, and that the Zionist supremacists are encouraging Muslim immigration, is what she said. So most of these comments were known when she ran and won election to represent the 14th Congressional District in Northwest Georgia. Tommy, what can be done about her now? Already, freshman Democrat Cori Bush has asked for her office to be moved away from Greene's for safety reasons.
I mean, it seems like there's 3 options. You can expel her from Congress. That takes a 2/3 vote, so it seems unlikely. You could censure her, which would just sort of condemn her. I think that has some bipartisan support. And then Democrats are now saying, if you don't strip her, saying to Kevin McCarthy, if the Republican Party won't strip her of her committee assignments, they will do it for them. I think she's on the House Education, Labor, the Help committee, right? She's on the labor committee, education, and then the budget committee. So, some powerful places.
Yeah, I saw. I think I saw in Politico today. They said if the Republican caucus in the House ends up stripping Liz Cheney from her leadership post, but doing nothing about Greene, it'll be a real black eye for them heading into 2022. Yeah. No, I would say so. I would say that would be a black
two demerits for you, Kevin McCarthy.
So, Lovett, kind of a broader question here. Greene got a lot of coverage and attention last week. She's bound to get more. What do we do about this going forward? Should we ignore her? Should we make her the face of the Republican Party? How do you balance that?
It's look, it's the same problem we've had in dealing with Trump for years. What do you do when this person feeds on attention and outrage, and yet also speaks for a huge percentage of the Republican Party at this point, and as you just pointed out, is more ascendant than the group of 10 House Republicans who had the audacity to tell the truth and vote to impeach Donald Trump. Tim Miller wrote in Rolling Stone about what these 10 Republicans are doing to try to start fighting against this radical, rabid, conspiracy-minded wing. Well, really, the Republican Party itself. And you read it, and man, it just has some very strong Alamo vibes of just a group of people facing this racist, anti-Semitic, conspiratorial group of people, and the huge mass of cowards unwilling to take them on. I imagine Kevin McCarthy would be quite relieved if Democrats remove someone like Greene from her committees, because it spares them the embarrassment and headlines that she will surely create when she's on those committees. That said, I think it's morally irresponsible to treat this person as she just has a different set of beliefs and teach the controversy. So I think we have to condemn it. I think we have to use all of our power to condemn it. I think we have to isolate it and try to get rid of it. I'm not against I don't know why you wouldn't have a vote to expel them and get all these Republicans on record as to whether or not they want this kind of person in Congress and speaking for them, especially if they're about to get Liz Cheney off of their leadership committee. So, I don't know. That's it. That's what I got.
Tommy, I'm inclined to make her the face of the Republican Party. What do you think?
Yeah. So I think the question of how you deal with trolls is complicated. And to be clear, that's what she is. Marjorie Taylor Greene is a troll. She's doing this for retweets. She's doing it to raise money. So is this Madison Cawthorn guy, right? The other famous Republican freshman who says he's basically structured his staffing around communications and not policy. I've been reading a lot about the alt-right crew from 2015 and 2016. So they derived money and power and influence by saying inflammatory things and then getting well-meaning liberals to get outraged and react to them or share their stuff. And it was effectively a strategy enabled by social media, because Facebook and Twitter helped people like Milo or Mike Cernovich go from running blogs that no one ever looked at to getting their views in front of a lot of people. But when they got deplatformed, when they got kicked off of Facebook or YouTube, people like Alex Jones or Milo, it hurt them a lot. And I think, the damage was done because they built an audience and they filtered their views into the broader MAGA world, and they shifted the boundaries of the discourse in politics. But ultimately, that was the right move. I think that Marjorie Taylor Greene has to be deplatformed. She has a platform called Congress. They need to draw a line in the sand because it's the right thing to do, but also I think it will work. When the Republicans stripped Steve King of his power, it helped eventually lead to his defeat in a Republican primary. It took too long, but it also embarrassed the party. And not having Steve King in Congress is a good thing. Not having Marjorie Taylor Greene in Congress would be a good thing. To your broader point of the face of the party, Trump constantly accuses the Democratic Party of being anti-Semitic because of comments by a few individual members. I think we should do the same thing. We need to up the cost of being associated with Marjorie Taylor Greene and draw a line in the sand and say this person shouldn't be making laws. I have no faith in the Republicans to do the right thing. Trump is injecting himself. He called Marjorie Taylor Greene. He's, on her side. McCarthy is a coward and a moron, right? He just went and groveled at Trump's feet at Mar-a-Lago. Mitch McConnell won't provide any leadership on the impeachment vote. I'm sure he won't step in here. They are stuck in this same cowardly Republican loop But, someone needs to excise this political cancer, because we can't hide from people like her. It's going to grow. Like, she is the new face of the party. She is the norm now. It is not Paul Ryan. It is not these like country club Republicans. It's people like her.
Yeah, no, and I think that's an important point to make. Like, it, just from a pure political standpoint, pure political perspective, in 2020, like, most Republican candidates ran ahead of Donald Trump. Donald Trump was seen as more extreme than most Republican candidates. That wasn't necessarily the case in 2016, which is why we got him. One of the reasons we got him as president. In general, if a party is viewed as more extreme, they do worse. That's what the data shows. And if the Republican Party is viewed as the party of Donald Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert, they're going to do worse in a lot of parts of the country. Obviously not all. Obviously there's some deep red parts, but in a lot of parts of the country where it matters, they will do worse than if the party is seen as the party of Mitt Romney and Susan Collins, right? Like, it sounds basic, but it's true. So you're right. Like, I totally agree, Tommy, on all the stuff about, like, she should be deplatformed, and it's good to think about that in Congress as well as on social media. But I do think that Democrats should let it be known that she is the face of the party now.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
the Republican Party is the cult of Trump. Without an intervention, that will be the case, right? Matt Gaetz is in Wyoming for some reason, campaigning against Liz Cheney. Marjorie Taylor Greene is growing in influence. Like, I don't like Liz Cheney's politics, but I do like her position on reality, in that she is tethered to it. You know what I mean? But, like, it's not just them. It's Ron Johnson, the senator from Wisconsin, who's using his position to elevate conspiracy theories, including about vaccines and attacking social distancing and masks. So yeah, there's a real problem within that party. It's not good for Democrats to have an opposition party be that diseased.
It's worth remembering too that, like, man, Liz Cheney spread the most noxious, toxic right-wing propaganda for years. It was the Bush type, not the Trump type. She was a post 9/11 right-winger who attacked Democrats in the most pernicious ways to try to undercut their patriotism and all of that. We dealt with it for years. She was heinous, and it's a testament to how, not just how far the party has moved, but how people like Liz Cheney contributed to that movement, that they are responsible, that they set the tone and they moved the party right, and they ignored the worst voices in their party for years that put them in this situation.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about the Republican Civil War. There's no Civil War. The side, the reality-based side is losing badly and almost done.
Because they're not fighting. It's like Adam
they don't wanna
Kinzinger
fight.
is the only one on TV. Adam Kinzinger, a Republican from Illinois, congressman. I don't agree with him on a single policy. He's the only person who has had the guts to stand up to Trumpism and lies and conspiracy theories for years. And, like, odds are he's going to be attacked and someone's going to try to primary, because the rest of the people who know he's right don't have the guts to say so.
Yeah,
I guess they would rather just cling to power.
He gets credit, and Mitt Romney gets credit in the Senate, and I don't think there's too many others.
I think that what I would like to see, though, just about extracting costs for what they've been doing. So Scott Beagle is one of the people that was killed in Parkland. I actually knew him. I grew up with him. And his mother called Marjorie Taylor Greene and basically said, like, are you willing to tell me right now that my son was killed wasn't killed, that there was a false flag? And she wouldn't. And she said, well, will you come on television with me and say it? Will you apologize? Will you admit that Parkland really happened, that, like, my son and his heroism is real, that our pain is real? And she refused to do it. And as long as people like Kevin McCarthy aren't willing to do that, like, I would like to see these clips paid for these people. Like, we there's, for so long, Republicans are like, oh, the media treats us like the away team and you're the home team. And there's some truth to that. But one of the ways in which it benefits Republicans is that the press treats Republicans like McCarthy. It treats them like antagonists. It treats them like people that can't change, that don't deserve to be confronted, that don't deserve to be held to the same standard that Democrats are held to. Hold them to the standard. Show them the clips. Embarrass them on television. Make them pay for what they're endorsing by not standing up to these people.
If you aren't subscribed already, be sure to check out our What a Day newsletter, written by the brilliant Sarah Lazarus, who gives you a quick, accessible, hilarious recap of the day's news. Some people are even saying it's funnier in the Biden administration. So, subscribe to What a Day newsletter today at crooked.com/subscribe. And finally, Crooked Media's own Dr. Abdul El Sayed, host of America Dissected, is out with a new book today. It's called Medicare for All, A Citizen's Guide. It's a no-nonsense guide to America's most debated policy in waiting. Order yours today at MedicareForAllBook.com. Check it out.